Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about the new SEC climate-related risk disclosures. Now, this has been a hot button topic. We kind of were waiting for this to happen. It's been out there. The proposal was actually from 2 years ago. So we were kind of waiting for this, and it didn't seem like it was going to happen. And then ultimately by a 3-2 vote, they did vote to pass these new climate-related disclosures. So the title is the Enhancement and Standardization of Climate-Related Disclosures for Investors. And again, this is something that they proposed 2 years ago, and they received 24,000 comment letters. So it took them some time to go through those comment letters. So some of what we're going to cover today, again, we're going to go over just some high-level items. This is a course in and of itself, but we are going to just give you the highlights of what you need to know here. There are going to obviously be disclosures of climate-related risks, as well as disclosures of the impact of those risks on strategy, business model, and outlook. And you can see here there are different sections that kind of address within the guidance. They also have within their governance disclosures, risk management disclosures, if you set targets or goals, and then what everyone wants to talk about, the greenhouse gas emissions and attestation standards, and then our safe harbor, because again, a lot of this is forward-looking information like our targets and goals. And then the financial statement effects, right? So there's a whole section on how certain climate-related items are, in this scenario, it's actually how certain, natural disasters basically have impacted the financial statements. And then if you are doing this, what are the setup for the different types of forms that you have to complete? And because this is being done by the SEC, how does it go into EDGAR? Because you are required to use EDGAR as we go through. So first and foremost, this is not a separate form. A lot of this is going to be in your normal 10K filing that you do on an annual basis. There are some quarterly considerations there as well. So this is not going to be a separate sort of ESG or climate-related items. It's going to be part of our financial statement process that we do. And it's pretty much all registrants. They did give one exception for greenhouse gas emissions and attestation for emerging growth companies and small reporting companies, but they are still required to do all the other disclosures. So again, the SEC did not give a lot of exceptions to these requirements here. In terms of the disclosures, they want a description of any climate-related risk that have, and here's the key term, materially impacted or are reasonably likely to have a material impact on the registrant, including strategy, results of operations, and financial conditions, as well as the actual or potential material impacts of those risks on strategy, business model, and outlook. So again, the one change from the previous proposal to here is that there is a consideration of materiality, and they do cite the U.S. Supreme Court definition of materiality, which focuses on whether a reasonable investor would consider that as part of their decision-making process. There's also specified disclosures regarding any activities made to mitigate or adapt to a potential material climate-related risk or use of transition plans. And so they talk about that again, scenario analysis, internal carbon pricing as part of it. As we mentioned, governance is a big element of this. So disclosures about any oversight by the registrant's board of directors of any climate-related risk and any role by management in assessing and managing those risks. A description of any process that that the registrant's using to assess or manage the material climate-related risks, and then disclosures about targets or goals that have materially affected or are reasonably likely to materially affect the registrant's business, results of operations, or financial conditions. So for example, if you say, we're going to be carbon neutral by XYZ date, or we're going to, right, in those scenarios, well, how does that affect your business? A lot of the conversation from the original proposal was around the greenhouse gas emissions. Originally, they had proposed scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. In the final version, they only included scope 1 and scope 2. And this is only for our large accelerated filers and our accelerated filers. They exclude our smaller reporting companies and our emerging growth companies here. And so as a result, those are going to require disclosure of your scope 1, which are your direct greenhouse gas emissions, and then scope 2, which are your indirect greenhouse gas emissions from generation of purchased or acquired electricity, steam, heating, cooling, etc. And so the disclosures are going to be phased in over time. You see large accelerated filers go first, and they're looking at fiscal years in 2026. And then our accelerated filers are looking at fiscal years beginning after December or after 2028. So again, as we look forward, you are going to have an attestation requirement here. So CPAs will have an opportunity to provide either limited assurance in 2029 for the large accelerated filers and 2031 for accelerated filers, and then ultimately provide reasonable assurance and examination engagement by 2033. So we're looking at a pretty long transition to having reasonable assurance about these numbers, but it is an opportunity. I will say that there's others out there. We've talked about the California guidelines that have been issued here. And so this is actually a little bit more scaled back than even the proposal. In terms of financial statement effects, as you can see here, they do want to have the aggregate amount of expenditures expensed as incurred and losses excluding recoveries. So again, if you had insurance, for example, we would exclude those recoveries incurred during the fiscal year as a result of severe weather and other natural conditions. Now, there is a 1% threshold here of income or loss before income tax expense or benefit. So there is a threshold. And this is the amount expensed as incurred. And so as we go through this, you'll notice that they're focusing it on very specific items. And then the aggregate amount of capitalized costs and charges, excluding recoveries recognized during the fiscal year as a result of those severe weather events. And that is also subject to a threshold of 1%. And this is the absolute value of either your stockholders' equity or deficit. And there's an overall exemption of disclosure if it's less than $100,000 for your income statement line item or $500,000 for the balance sheet. So this is, again, derived from transactions and amounts already in your books and records. So they felt like this was not asking for anything extra that are out of what you already have gone through. And so there is no requirement to make a determination that the severe weather or the natural condition was caused by climate change, right? So there's no linkage here to climate change, just trying to focus on how much impact on the financial statements these weather conditions have had as we go through. In terms of the timing, as you can see here, kind of phased in. So you can see some of the initial disclosures and then the movement towards the greenhouse gas emissions. And ultimately, as I said, this is going to be required to be tagged for XBRL purchases. XBRL purposes. And so they did remove some of the requirements like the scope 3 greenhouse gas. It exempts non-accelerated filers and smaller reporting companies from certain elements of it, as you can see here. And then they only require the reasonable assurance for our large accelerated filers. Our accelerated filers never get to that reasonable assurance level. And then again, non-accelerated filers generally don't have to do any of that greenhouse gas. And so again, as we go through it, this table kind of gives you the timeline that we're working towards. So a lot of people asked about that whole safe harbor arrangement. And so again, when we look at this, if you're putting out your carbon pricing, you're looking at your targets and goals, they are covered by that. However, anything that's historical fact would obviously not be subject to the safe harbor. In terms of when do we expect this to be effective, it is 60 days after publishing in the Federal Register. So we're expecting May of 2024, although we are also expecting lawsuits and other fun things in the meantime, as many groups have already come out against this. Certain states have already passed legislation banning ESG from financial statements. So it's going to be an interesting ride. Some states are requiring it. Some states are banning it. It's all over the place in terms of process. But what we just need to know is that this is out there and that we should be monitoring it. Again, it's focusing on public companies, but we always want to also think about how this can maybe come down towards our private entities. All right, so that's a wrap on this week's blog. Thank you guys so much for joining me and hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.